Welcome to the Sleep Haunt. Tonight, the open road stretches endlessly ahead, with 8 true disturbing trucker horror stories, tales whispered from lonely highways, midnight rest stops, and long miles where the dark feels heavier than the sky. These aren't sudden frights, but quiet echoes that ride with you, lingering far beyond the last mile. Stay with me until the final story, where each thread pulls into the next, and the last echo reveals what waits on the road at night. If you enjoy nights like this, be sure to subscribe so you never miss what drifts through the dark. And before we begin, share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing where these stories travel. Story number 1. He had been running light across an open plateau, a silver tractor pulling a dry van that hummed like a steady tuning fork in the dark. The night was crisp, the sky tall and star-pocked, and everything behind the windshield held a peaceful kind of stillness. He had tuned the CB to a low murmur on 19, more for the comfort of it than for chatter, and the green glow from the dash lit his hands on the wheel. Out there, where the wind pushed little waves across the grass, and no porch lights lived for miles, the highway felt like a living thing, steady, patient, always going. He saw the first sign 2 miles out. Way station. The digital panel beneath it read, "Closed," in quiet red. He glanced at his mirrors and at the clock. Plenty of hours on the ELD, tandems right where they should be, weight spread clean. The reefer unit wasn't chugging tonight, empties were a different kind of companion, so the cab felt oddly hushed. A mile later, as the asphalt rose into a gentle bend, the sign blinked. Closed flickered out, open snapped to green. It was the good kind of open, the kind that usually meant roll-through after a slow crawl. He breathed out and took the ramp. The scale house sat in a bowl of light. Sodium lamps washed the concrete with a dull yellow that made shadows look like stains. He rolled up at a walking pace, tires whispering. The sign over the lane read, "Proceed when lit." The tiny bulbs in the letters were old, glass domes like beads, and their glow was steady, unwavering. The green arrow popped on. He crept onto the platform. The air gauge ticked, the needle hovered. He watched the window of the scale house. Behind the glass, a desk stood neat and neat again, a black phone, a stack of forms, a coffee pot on a hot plate. A wall clock with real hands ticked, but he couldn't hear it. There was no one inside. The readout on the roadside board would normally flash axle weights. Tonight, numbers rose that weren't weights. The screen glowed a pale orange, clicking digits like an old flip clock. 1979, then 03, then 21. It sat there a moment. The printer on the side of the cabinet chirped and fed a narrow strip of paper. He reached out his window, took it with 2 fingers. The paper felt thin, almost brittle, and there was an emboss on the state seal that he didn't recognize in its older shape. The date at the top read the 21st of March 1979. His DOT number was printed, but it wasn't the one on his door, no. It matched the company his father had once driven for, a name that hadn't been on a trailer in 30 years. He sat there, engine idling quiet, and felt the kind of silence that isn't empty at all. The green arrow over the lane stayed lit. "Driver," the speaker beside the window said. The voice was clear, a radio voice, and polite. "Ease it up. Bring your steer onto the pad." He looked around. The little black speaker was the kind that had to be pressed to talk, yet no one's hand was on it. He tapped his foot off the clutch and crept until the steer tires sat square. He watched the mirror. In it, the scale house reflected a sliver of night and 2 shoulder-high weeds that leaned in the wind. The reflection did not show him. It showed a different truck, white, with round marker lights, and a man in a blue shirt leaning out the window. He blinked and looked straight ahead. In front of him it was just his hood, just the light bleaching the lane, just the sign saying, "Proceed." "Steers look good," the speaker said. "You running empty?" He cleared his throat. He answered before thinking, a habit from a lifetime of checkpoints and dock doors. Affirmative. A soft sound came through the speaker, like someone setting a ceramic mug on tile. "You'll want to check your back door. Your seal isn't quite right." He glanced again at the mirror. Nothing. He pulled the parking brake, the hiss loud in the stillness, and swung the door open. The night outside was cool and smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. His boots on the concrete made honest sounds, heel-toe, heel-toe. He walked the length of the trailer, hands sliding along the riveted aluminum, and the air around him felt like a hallway in an empty building present, but waiting. At the swing doors, the seal sat neat and snug. A new green band, crimped and numbered, just the way he had put it at the last warehouse. He tugged it lightly. It held. The numbers matched the paperwork in his visor. He glanced at the scale house window. Inside, the coffee in the pot steamed. A light above the door hummed. He went back up, climbed in, and closed the door. When he clicked the seatbelt, the speaker said, "You're the first one tonight." He key-eyed the CB, but the glow there was normal, channel quiet. His hand on the wheel didn't shake. He steadied his breathing. The road had taught him 1,000 ways to focus, and one of them was to watch the tiny things, the way the needle vibrated at idle, the tick of the turn signal, the way the throttle had a little grit at the start. "Proceed when ready," said the speaker. The green arrow stayed on. He eased forward, crossed the platform, and took the gentle curve that led back to the highway. The on-ramp swallowed him, and he merged into what looked like the same pieces of darkness he'd left. A minute later, a new sign rose. "Wait station, 2 miles. Closed, then flicker, open." He said nothing out loud. He checked the clock. Time had moved, but in a way that felt thin, as if the minutes weren't sticking. He lifted off the throttle. He watched the billboard across the way, the one with the smiling family and a picnic table. He had seen it once, miles back. The corner had a missing panel, a dangling triangle of metal that flapped in the wind. The same piece dangled here, making the same soft clatter against the frame. He took the ramp again. This time, the scale house wore a different skin. The lights in the lot were dimmer, and a moth chattered against the nearest bulb. A sound like soft, dry fingers. The paint on the curb had worn to exposed concrete. A chain hung across the bypass lane, and weeds draped over it like an old shawl. The window was dusty. The coffee pot was there, but the glass inside it was cracked, a white vein running down the side. The clock on the wall sat at 12 and didn't move. No one spoke. He rolled to a stop at the line and listened. The hum of his engine sounded brighter here, louder, like singing into a tiled room. The sign over the lane "Proceed" when lit was off, but he could see the outlines of the letters. He felt, very clearly, that he should not honk, he should not wave, he should not try the door. He should do only the smallest, simplest things. He put the truck in neutral and looked down at the weigh slip in the cup holder. The paper was still there, the date still wrong. He lifted it. When he did, the smell of warm paper and something oddly sweet rose from it, like the inside of a filing cabinet that had held 100 people's plans. He put it back and left the lane. The ramp back to the interstate felt longer than it had any right to be. Mile markers slipped by, green and reflective. He watched them. 212. 211. 210. The distance between them felt both stretched and crowded, like a photograph of a road rather than the road itself. The CB crackled once, a short burst, then settled. A man's voice rode in on the static all manners, no impatience, the practiced tone of someone who had to talk to a lot of tired drivers. "Tandems look good. You'll want to get your lights checked next stop." He switched the radio off. The cab got very quiet. The night guarded its shape for a while, then gave it back. The wind changed. Low hills rose and fell. A lane closed up ahead for no reason he could see, and then reopened. He watched for deer. Nothing crossed his beam. At 198, he saw the scale house again. From the highway it looked unusually clean, the way a new thing looks dull because it has never known dust. He passed without taking the ramp. As he did, the coffee pot hissed. He did not see it, but he knew, with the inexplicable certainty that sometimes accompanies a point on a map, that it hissed. He drove. He took a sip of water. He rolled one shoulder, and then the other. He told himself 3 things in the kind of mental voice that sounded like his father's. Keep your lane. Keep your eyes. Keep your time. And time, obeying, moved. Hours later or minutes, or whatever the night had decided was fair, he took an exit that wasn't in his GPS. County 6, a white sign said, with its letters straight as fence posts. The ramp was narrow and dipped beneath a 1-lane bridge that made the trailer's roof whisper. Beyond it, A little block building sat just off the road. A hand-painted sign above its door read Scale House Cafe. The E in Cafe leaned to the right, like it had gotten tired and needed a wall. A single lamp burned in the window. Inside, he could see a counter, 4 stools, a clock with big numbers, a pie case. No cars in the lot. No trucks either. He parked his tractor along the shoulder, leaving his flashers off because it felt like calling a name. The night around him was the modest kind of dark, country dark, with more space than threat in it. When he crossed to the door and put his hand on the handle, he felt a breeze from inside as if the room had lungs and had just exhaled. He did not go in. The door had a small square of corkboard beside it. On the board, under a row of dull pushpins, hung a single slip of paper with serrated edges. It was a way slip. It had his name on the signature line, written in a careful hand that made the letters sit up straight. He had not signed it. The weight numbers on it were zeros. Under comments, someone had written, "Cleared. Keep it safe." He took the slip. It felt warmer than the night. When he turned back to the road, the lamp in the window blinked once, a slow, tired blink, and went out. The county road led him gently home to the highway. The merge was easy, and the pavement ahead unfolded in a way that made sense again. He checked his mirrors. Only his own trailer's marker lights watched him, red dots in neat pairs, unblinking and normal. Dawn slipped in from the east, a pale seam of light that unthreaded the sky. He watched the color change the land, watched billboards get their faces back. At the next truck stop he pulled in, took fuel, and went to wash his hands. In the bright, ordinary fluorescent of the bathroom, he looked at himself and looked fine. He felt like the same person, only a little more awake. When he came back to the truck, a paper was tucked into the crease where the windshield met the dash. It was the way slip from the scale house, the first one, the old one. The date had rolled forward. It bore today's number now. Under it, faint but there, someone had stamped the word, "Proceed," in ink that looked as pale as breath. He ran his route on time. At the receiver, a kid with a clipboard walked around the trailer, clicked a pen, and said, "You're good." On the way out, the guard looked at his paperwork and nodded. Nothing else happened, and that was its own kind of strange. Weeks went by. The slip rode behind his visor, tucked into the leather as a kind of favor from the road. Every so often, on the shortest nights, a way station sign would flicker when it shouldn't, open for a second where the board had read closed. If he had the slip with him, the sign would hold steady after that, like a promise kept. If he forgot it in the dash for a day or two, he would notice small things. A coffee smell in a place with no cafe, a moth that bumped his window glass in winter, a number that came up twice in 2 different towns. He did not talk about it much. Once, parked nose to nose with another rig in a gravel lot where the lights buzzed like bees in jars, he told a driver who had gray at his temples and a cap from a company that no longer existed. The man listened, then told him a thing he'd heard years earlier. A scale master who used to sit long shifts in the middle of the night had made a habit of stamping slips with a gentle hand so as not to tear through the paper. When a driver came in looking dead on his feet, the scale master would print the slip himself and scrawl a quick note on the back, "Cleared. Keep it safe." It had never meant anything more than drive careful, but things like that sometimes keep going after the person who starts them is gone, as if the idea itself learned how to work the night. He nodded, and that was that. But on the rare evenings when the plateau went quiet and the wind made waves where no ocean lived, he would see the old sign out there, square and polite, and feel the short, soft prickle at the base of his scalp, the one that says, "Something remembers you because you paid attention." He would check his mirror. He would see only himself. And if he ever passed that little cafe again, and he might have, or might not have, he imagined the door would be unlocked, the clock set to eternally soon, the coffee neither fresh nor stale, just waiting. He did not go in. He drove by, as the road prefers. Somewhere in the space between 2 mile markers, a green arrow lit, not behind, not ahead, but somewhere perfectly parallel, where the night keeps a record of everyone who has ever crossed a quiet scale alone and needed to hear a kind voice say, "Proceed when ready." Story number 2. The prairie at night looked like a dark ocean held still by wind. Out there, a highway ran straight for long, patient miles. and to one side of it a field of wind turbines rose like tall, slow guardians. Their blades turned with a steady hush that could be heard only when the windows were down and the rest of the world decided to be quiet. Red beacons blinked atop each tower, synchronized so perfectly they became a heartbeat in the distance. On, off, on, off. A metronome for the night. He had hauled this route enough to know where the road lifted into a shallow ridge, where it fell, where a single farmhouse light burned winter and summer, and where the turbines began. They always seemed farther than they were, a trick of scale he respected. The sky above was clean and black, a velvet dome pricked by cold stars. The truck's gauges threw a dependable green glow across his knuckles, and the hum under his feet was the safe hum of everything doing the work it was supposed to do. The air was dry and smelled faintly of hay. He rolled his shoulders, blinked slowly, and took a sip from a bottle of water he'd wedged in the door pocket. He kept the radio low, not for conversation but for the gentle comfort of human noise weather updates, the odd sports score, a commercial from a town he wouldn't see. It was late, the late that lives between yesterday and tomorrow, where clocks feel more like suggestions. The first strange thing was so small he almost missed it. The beacons across the wind farm blinked, as they always did, all at once. Then, between one pulse and the next, the pattern changed. They separated into 3 waves rolling from south to north, a red sweep that moved exactly with his speed. He slowed 2 miles per hour to test it just to see, and the sweep slowed too. He sped back up. The sweep matched. He told himself it was a coincidence. Something in the control system stumbling then catching up, and he let it be. The next sign said service area 12 miles. He did a quick math in his head against his hours, and planned to stretch, to stand in the cold air and listen to the big sky breathe. When he crested the low ridge before the turbines, he felt the wind slip across the cab. Not a gust, but the kind of long push that makes a truck lean into its own weight. The red lights went back to their regular blink. It was nothing. He drummed his fingers lightly on the wheel. He liked that when the world made sense again without apology. Fog began as a rumor across the fields. It lay in long, low sheets that hugged the ground. That kind of prairie fog that seems to pour out of the earth. The road stayed clear, but the shoulders blurred, and the bottom halves of the turbines vanished into soft whiteness, so the towers looked like they were pinned into the sky with no support at all. The red beacons hovered, on their own, perfectly spaced, unanchored. He kept his lane and checked his mirrors twice each minute like a quiet ritual. A bend in the highway curved around a slight stand of cottonwoods. On the far side, amber light flickered where no town should be. He lifted off the throttle. A portable arrow board stood near the shoulder, its bulbs chasing a sequence that pointed toward a service road cut into the field. Detour. The board clicked with the dry sound of relays. Beside it, a temporary sign leaned on a metal foot. Exit ahead, closed use wind farm road. He hadn't heard anything about an exit closure. The traffic app on his phone showed nothing but a clean line, but the highway ahead glowed a dull orange for half a mile, and he could see the faint silhouettes of cones tightening into a lane. He kept his speed steady, gave himself time to think. It wasn't uncommon for rural crews to set a detour that didn't show up in an app until morning. The service road looked solid, graded gravel, dust held down by whatever crews spray when they want tires clean. A reflective chain lay coiled beside the entry like a sleeping snake, but the gap was open. He signaled out of courtesy to the empty night and turned, easing a 40-ton decision onto a road that wasn't meant to be friendly. Gravel hissed under his tires. The truck settled into a slower rhythm. The wind shifted. The turbines up close, even stilled by the fog, carried a presence, the way a barn does at dusk. Tall, useful, a little other. The red lights changed again. They blinked in a pattern that rolled ahead of him in a line matched to the curve of the road. He told himself the field was segmented into zones to help ground crews. He told himself it was a guide. It was exactly the kind of smart system a modern wind farm would install. He liked imagining good design. The road threaded between towers, each base marked with a small sign noting a number and the name of a manufacturer in clean block font. He passed T19, T20, T20, amperes. He caught the faint scent of warmed metal, as if a pump far away had been working all day and was thinking about resting. He checked the app again. Service flickered, dropped to 1 bar, then none. The ELD stayed polite and awake, its screen a calm rectangle that watched him without judgment. He glanced back at the trailer in the mirror. It followed like a well-trained dog. The amber flash of a maintenance truck appeared ahead, bouncing low in the fog. He saw the light, then the hint of a white pickup with reflective striping down the side and a high-mounted beacon that spun in an old-fashioned way. It moved at exactly his pace, always just beyond comfortable reach. He could have caught it if he really wanted to, but he didn't. He liked having it there like a carrot tied safely in front of a mule, a sign someone else had done this before. The pickup signaled clearly, politely left, though there were no lanes to speak of. The road widened, then narrowed, shifted its weight around a stand of brush. The trailer's tires brushed against bigger stones but held. He let the pickup make the decisions. It stopped once at a crosscut where 3 identical tracks met. Brake lights red and patient, then went on. There was no driver silhouette in its cab. He told himself the fog made everything in front of glass vanish into light. That's what fog does when it likes a secret. T27, T28, T29. He counted without meaning to. Someone had painted the numbers by hand and then gone back a year later to repaint them with a stencil. The old numbers showed like ghosts beneath the crisp white. The red beacons above paused just once and then blinked a double time, as if noting his presence. He felt a light pressure at the base of his neck and shrugged it away. He was simply tired. He knew tired. He had made peace with it years ago by giving it rules. Eat when it says you're not hungry. Drink water like it's a job. Pull over before your head nods. The rules had always kept him a step ahead. The maintenance pickup led him past a small building set between towers. It was a prefabricated site office, the kind with 2 windows and a single door with a push bar. A string of cool white LEDs traced the roofline. Behind one window, a corkboard hung with laminated maps, each marked with a grid. The other window reflected his own headlights back at him, but in the reflection he saw a tiny discrepancy. His truck wore a different company decal, a color the fleet had retired years ago. Just a trick of the glass, he decided. Old peel lines on his door could play tricks under certain light. At the corner of the site office, a weathered plastic rack held disposable safety vests. The orange of them glowed under the LEDs. For a moment, he thought he saw someone reach for one. An arm. A hand. But then the pickup's beacon swung around, and the light washed the image into simple bright. He laughed once, the quiet kind of laugh that keeps the air moving in your lungs. He did not stop. The road rose, dipped, rose. The fog deepened. It didn't grow thicker so much as closer, gathering itself into the cab without scent or damp. He could feel it like the idea of a coat someone was holding just above his shoulders. The red lights above him seemed brighter for it, less like warnings and more like punctuation. He tapped the glass near his A-pillar. The inside of the windshield was dry. Road closed ahead, a voice said. It was not the radio. It was a public address speaker on the side of the site office he had already passed, set to a low volume that carried easily in the still air. The tone was unhurried and free of any drama, the kind used by people who talk into microphones for a living. Please follow Detour Arrow Boards. To rejoin highway. He nodded at no one and drove on. The pickup's beacon winked twice and settled into a steadier spin. He thought he caught letters on the tailgate when the fog moved just right. US on N. The rest obscured by dust and reflection. It was enough. Gust and Energy, probably. He had seen their logo on nacelles. A deer crossed in front of him without being there. He felt the old reflex engage the barely controlled lift of foot, the weighing of brake pressure against the physics of 40,000 pounds, the invisible reaching for space on either side, and then there was no deer, and his posture relaxed. He had imagined it. The mind often put animals in a place where danger could be, as if practicing made the real thing easier. He took a slow breath and let it out through his nose. The road turned left where he expected it to go straight. The turbines crowded tighter, as if the field had been planned by a hand that ran out of space. That was the first time he felt an edge of unease. He checked his bearing against the wind. It should have been at his right cheek, pushing from the west, but now it came from a place that didn't agree with any map he knew. He slowed to a near crawl. The pickup went on ahead, climbed a small rise, and faded in the fog, its beacon finally a dim ember in a nest of dark. He stopped. The engine idled a little louder in the stillness. He put on his flashers because it was what you do when you are a person who respects the rules of big machines. The red pulses bathed the ground at his bumper in heartbeat color. He left them on and stepped down into the gravel. Cold air carried a scent like clean metal and dry grass. He listened. The wind turbines all around him held their blades at a slight angle, as if poised. They turned slowly, almost imperceptibly, though he could hear them a soft, wide sound, like a breath drawn by something large and patient. He walked to the front of his truck and put his palm on the hood. It was warm, reassuring. He took another slow breath. A reflective vest lay folded neatly on the gravel just ahead of his bumper, as if set there for him. The tape across the shoulders caught his flashers and threw orange-red back in kind little lines. He knelt and picked it up. It was new enough to smell like a plastics factory, and it had a small patch over the heart. Visitor. He straightened, held it a second longer than he meant to, and then, because he was polite even where no one could see, he draped it over the handle of his passenger door in case someone came back looking for it. When he climbed in again, the road had arranged itself the way roads sometimes do when they are in a mood to help. The fog lifted an inch off the ground, enough to show him a strip of darker gravel that led away between two turbine bases, an arrow drawn with shadow. He released the brake and followed it. T-31, T-32, T-33. His headlights caught the reflective eyes of small animals in the grass, rabbits, probably who watched him pass with their simple, honest curiosity. The pickup did not reappear, but the red beacons took up its role. They blinked in a sequence that seemed to pull him along, tower to tower, a quiet baton pass of light. He tried not to think of it as a path made just for him. He tried not to think of it as a test he should pass. He thought instead of the highway the clean, straight check of its paint, the mile markers with their green faces, the hot coffee he would pour at the service area a dozen miles up the line. The service road dipped into a culvert and rose onto a little causeway. Beyond it, he saw the fence that ran along the outer edge of the wind farm, chain link, topped with a single strand of barbed wire more for show than anything. Just past, the orange cones of a highway work zone sat in friendly order. He rolled closer, and the cones resolved into what they actually were. Barrels covered in snow fence mesh to keep them from wandering in the wind. They formed a gentle curve back into the world. He took it. He merged onto the highway at a point that surprised him. Not where the detour sign had promised, but 3 exits later. His ELD chirped and caught up, the little rectangle blinking in a way he recognized as patience rewarded. His phone breathed bars back into its top corner. The app map refreshed. No closures anywhere. No warnings. No notes. The road ahead was all ordinary, and that felt like grace. A state cruiser sat in the median a mile on, lights rolling in a lazy, friendly pattern. The trooper inside watched traffic with the look of someone counting cars for fun. As he passed, the trooper flicked his spotlight once across the length of the trailer and then called the light back like a trained dog. No pullout, no interest beyond the human desire to inventory the night. Good, he relaxed a small gear's worth. At the service area, he parked under a light that hummed and warmed a circle of concrete. He stretched, shook his arms loose, and went inside. Everything was clean in the bright way that makes tile look like origin. A clerk wiped a counter, nodded hello. The coffee tasted like coffee. A trucker 2 booths over told a story about a crosswind near the border in a voice designed for slow audiences and long nights. All of it felt right. When he came back to the truck, the orange vest still hung on the passenger handle, patient as a thought that has decided to be useful. He didn't remember locking the truck, but the door gave easily, as it always did when he wanted it to. On the inside of the vest, a sewn-in tag carried a company name he recognized, Guston Energy. Below it, in tiny print, a date. It was last year's. On the lining, the vest had an inspection stamp, cleared, night maintenance marked, with a number that matched nothing on his truck but matched something in him anyway. He folded the vest and tucked it behind the seat, telling himself he'd drop it off at the next operations building he found. When daylight came and the wind farm was a pale row of white against a clean sky, he checked his tires in the sun and found red dust in the treads that looked like powdered brick. The county around him grew nothing out of clay that read. The gravel where he had pulled off showed tire marks that led nowhere. He shrugged and drove on. As people do when the night leaves behind a handful of details that don't agree with daytime. That afternoon, parked at a shipper's lot waiting for a dock door, he asked a yard hand about the wind farm detour casual, like you ask about rain. The kid frowned and blew a strand of hair off his forehead. Haven't had a night closure on that stretch in months, he said. They finished up before the fair. Arrow boards are in the yard in pieces. I can spray paint them for Halloween if I want. The kid grinned, his attention already moving to a forklift that squeaked when it reversed. You probably just took a county road. He nodded, and that was fine. Later, at the next truck stop, an older mechanic sat on a plastic milk crate near the shop door, drinking coffee and grinning at a story someone had just told. The mechanic had a patch over his breast pocket that read Cal in big letters and smaller letters that had once spelled more. Cal listened to the question about wind farms and detours, like a man who has collected odd nights as a kind of hobby. Lights out there are all synced to GPS, Cal said, scratching his chin. They drift sometimes. You'll see it from the road. Makes patterns you can make jokes about. And those maintenance trucks? He tipped his cup toward the horizon. Sometimes they get busy with folks who need help finding an exit. The mechanic's eyes did a small thing that might have been a wink, and might have been a twitch brought on by the years. He laughed anyway. If the road walks you somewhere and brings you back without so much as a scratch on your fenders, that's a favor. Best to say thanks and keep rolling. He did. He rolled through dusk and into another long night, and he did not see the pickup again. He did notice once or twice, when he passed a wind farm out in the middle of a square mile of nobody, that the red beacons would blink a little faster as he approached and slow once he had gone by, as if acknowledging him by nodding in unison. He noticed that when fog lay low, he felt calmer beneath it than he had any right to feel. He noticed the vest stayed clean no matter how gravel dust wanted to cling. He drove as he always had, with care for the great machine that kept him a respectful passenger through dark hours. On a later run, months after the night with the detour, he took that stretch again. No portable signs, no arrow boards. The service road gate was chained and locked, a laminated placard swinging from its center with a smiley request to call ahead for access. The turbines stood in orderly lines, blinking their steady red. At the far edge of the field, a maintenance truck idled, while two workers checked a panel and wrote something on a clipboard. He saw them laugh under their breath at the end of a sentence and felt good about people in general. As the highway turned him gently past, the red beacons timed themselves to nothing but the sky, all in one, all at once. And if they paused just once to allow a pattern only he could place into meaning, that was between him and the part of the night that takes care of drivers who trust what they see and also what can't be seen. He kept his lane, he kept his eyes, he kept his time. The day took him with ease. Story number 3. She preferred mountain passes at night. Fewer brake lights, fewer tourists riding their brakes on long downgrades, fewer distractions. The dark simplified everything to the honest work of weight and gravity. Her rig climbed with a steady patience she liked a straight 6 hum, turbo singing softly, coolant temp holding shy of the mark. On the passenger seat, a thermos rattled gently with each expansion joint. On the dash, the ELD ticked hours in quiet, polite rectangles. The first signs rose out of the black like small, careful decrees. Road work ahead. 1 lane. Pilot. Car leads. She'd heard talk on the radio earlier scaling rock above the upper tunnel. Loose slices of mountain they wanted to coax down before winter latched on for good. No big deal, the chatter had said. Escorts every half hour. Stay patient. A variable message board glowed beyond a curve, amber letters shifting at an unhurried pace. Next escort 12, 30 amperes. M. She checked her clock. She had time to make the line. The queue formed just past a turnout where an old information sign listed elevation and the date the road was first blasted through the granite. She eased in behind a reefer from Idaho and a flatbed carrying covered equipment. Behind her, a boxy cabover idled with a patient rumble at odds with its age, white paint glowing like a ghost tooth in the dark. A flagger's truck sat off to the right, hazard lights making a slow beat against the wall of fir trees. The night smelled of cooling brakes and cold stone. CB chatter was more etiquette than conversation. "Y'all catching that pilot at past?" someone asked. "Copy that," another voice said. "Channel 12. For escort, that's what the laminated says at the cone." Channel 12 was old school for a pilot. She flipped over anyway, just to be polite. The wind came off the slope in long, invisible folds. The stars were bright between branches. Someone up front killed headlights and let marker lights paint polite. Patient dots along the shoulder. She sipped coffee and tried not to think about the grade on the far side, the long, careful descent with runaway ramps like calm promises at measured intervals. She liked grades. They respected reason. At 12:28 by her dash clock, an amber glow swelled around the bend. A white pickup rolled into view, older by a couple of decades, but clean in the way a tool stays clean when someone takes pride in it. A rotating beacon spun on the roof instead of the modern strobes, throwing warm circles over the asphalt. In the rear window, not LEDs, but a backlit placard read "Follow Me" in tidy block letters. Lettering like that belonged to another decade. But in the mountains, another decade often stayed useful if you let it. The pickup rolled past the line, paused at the front, and the arm of the person in the driver's seat lifted, motioning gently. The first truck clicked into gear. The line rippled to life, quiet as a held breath. "Escort rolling at 1:30, said a voice on Channel 12, smooth as if he'd said it 1,000 times before. "Keep it snug, keep it kind. Brake lights only around the curve. Left lane is your lane. Tunnel drips. Watch your mirrors." He didn't say his name. He didn't need to. The tone was steady and practical. She fell in behind the flatbed, left blinker ticking once out of habit, and the convoy eased forward into the work zone. Cones tightened into a narrow throat. Retro-reflective chevrons on the barricades looked older than they should yellowed, not the bright white that struck back at modern headlights, and the metal feet wore a kind of long-using scuff. The road traced the mountain's inside shoulder, a garden of granite blocks on the right, a guardrail on the left, and beyond that, an unseeable drop. The pickup's beacon turned the rock face into a slow carousel of amber. They passed a call box, the old kind with a metal door and a push button. Its paint the particular blue that sun fades toward chalk. A square sign above it read "Emergency Telephone." The font bent into letters that made her think of maps from grade school. She hadn't seen one of those in a while. She told herself some stretches of road still kept them for redundancy. That soothed something in her that liked backup plans. "Coming to the tunnel," the escort said. 13. 6 is honest. But mind your crown. Middle of the lane is sweet. Water had carved black tears down the tunnel's mouth. A chain-link curtain, rolled back to one side, rattled a little in the wind. The pickup's brake lights feathered, the line checked together. Her mirrors filled with tidy red pairs as far back as the fog allowed. It was not a damp night, but the tunnel gave itself permission to be wet regardless. The roof was mottled with mineral, stripes like a history of winters written in the stone. Her tires hummed differently inside, a hollow tone like breath in a bottle. Halfway through, she caught a glint in the curb. Coins, maybe old pennies that someone had tossed, or reflectors set in the concrete when the world wanted roads to have jewelry. Her radio whispered in a way that wasn't interference. "Hold your lane, sweetheart. You're doing fine." The voice rode the same channel, the same tone, just a little closer to her ear, like the speaker had leaned in without stepping nearer. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. A good escort could read a line of trucks by the way their lights moved, could feel a driver's doubt by watching how a brake brightened. They came out the far side and into a different kind of dark. The stars seemed lower, thicker somehow, as if the sky had pressed closer for warmth. The pickup eased the line along a gentle S-curve around a retaining wall faced with rounded stones that looked hand-set. Someone had painted them once. The paint had given up long ago. A sign ahead read Vista Point 1/4 mile, its corner dented. She didn't remember a vista on this approach. The scenic pullout she knew belonged on the other side, pointed west. Maybe there had been one once, before fencing went in. Roads weren't static. She reminded herself of that. It helped. Another set of cones, another wash of amber across bark and stone. A portable generator sat on skids with a green metal skin. The logo faded to a ghost of its old shape. Its engine ticked warm, but not running. The line tightened, then flowed. The escort's placard glowed steady, as if it were a word it intended to keep forever. They made a simple climb and a simple turn, and then the queue lights ahead. Not the far exit, not the promised downhill. The same turnout with the same flagger's tent, the same information sign with the elevation, the same trees nodding at nothing in particular. The pickup didn't stop. It rolled through and led them past, like a wind that slid around a hill rather than over it. For a moment she wondered if the escorts had looped them to give machinery time to clear a spot. That happens sometimes. String trucks through a holding pattern while a loader caught its breath. She glanced at the ELD. It showed motion in minutes rather than miles, as if the road had been content to be counted by time tonight. She glanced at the cab over behind her. Its driver sat forward, elbows light on the wheel, focused but not tense. A sticker on his door was from a company she hadn't seen running in years. It wasn't impossible. Old names lingered, bought, and relettered and bought again. The cabover's marker lights had the shy glow of bulbs, not LEDs. She noticed because noticing tiny things was how she collected calm when the world asked her to do strange work at 2 a.m. "Round 2, the escort said, cheerful but not unserious. "Same as before. Keep it tidy." The tunnel again, water changing its own mind in slow motion. The roof drip found the same seams. A pattern of damp on the wall looked like a map of a coastline she couldn't place. She eased through, and this time a smell found her. Not unpleasant hot dust, hedged with something like old paper. Like a library. Someone had kept clean for a long time. They came out into what might have been the same stars, or stars arranged with a slightly different sense of humor. A small building stood where she didn't remember one, cinder block with a pitched roof and a window glowing green, as if a fluorescent tube inside had been coaxed back to life for one more night. A man in a yellow jacket stood under the eave, holding a clipboard that reflected no light at all. He lifted his free hand and gave the kind of wave people use when they see a friend approach in a place no one else knows how to find. The wave wasn't for her. It was for all of them, and that felt like a larger kind of courtesy. She wanted to ask on the radio if anyone else saw the building, but the question felt clumsy in her mouth. The road had its own language for odd things, and most of it was silence folded around the fact of them. The downgrade never came. The pickup guided them through a third loop, around cones and between barriers and past signs whose fonts changed subtly from modern clarity to that older, narrower style, as if eras were stacked a page too close. Her clock made no case about it. Her posture relaxed in ways she didn't instruct it to. The work felt less like being led, and more like being walked home. Finally, the pickup slowed on a straight, just long enough for the lead truck to pull alongside. The window came down. She couldn't see the driver's face, only the suggestion of a cap with a short brim, the kind foreman used to favor when photos looked like newspaper ink. A hand pointed to the right shoulder, where a cone had a ribbon tied to it. A plain white ribbon tied in a practical square knot, whispering in the breeze. "End of line is yours," the escort said, the voice softer now, more like the way people speak in low rooms so they don't wake a baby. "Take the shoulder at the ribbon. Road's clear from there. Keep your engine in its comfort, and don't look too hard at the black." The lead truck did as told. The line peeled out in sequence. When her turn came, she eased right, followed the ribbon's hint, and felt the uphill shoulder roll away into the gentle crown of the main line. Ahead, the downgrade finally stretched itself like a cat waking from a nap long tidy, with the smooth wash of reflective paint and the little blue signs that whispered distance to the next turnout. Her hands settled on the wheel in the way they always did when the world went back to being knowable. She checked the mirror. No pickup, no beacon. The cabover merged without drama, then drifted into the slow lane and became red dots with personality. The flagger's truck at the original queue sat in its same spot, but the tent was buttoned down and dark. At the bottom of the grade, a DOT cruiser idled with its parking lights on, just before the way station that would only open with the Sunday. The trooper in the cab watched his screens in the boredom reserved for 3 a.m. She debated a question, then rolled into the empty lot and stopped where the engines of sleep usually lined up. The trooper cut his lights and stepped out, hands in his jacket pockets, expression curious but not suspicious. "Everything okay?" he asked, tone easy. "Fine," she said. "You running escorts up there tonight?" He shook his head. "Rock work is off until Thursday. Crews pulled out at 9. They told us to hold traffic on the west side until morning, so nothing bounces loose." He glanced at her trailer, at the clean stripe of dust on the rims. "You took the pass?" "Followed a pilot car on the half hour," she said, and immediately felt the words turn into a story when they left her mouth. He kept his face neutral, the courteous look of a man trained not to embarrass someone who might only need to hear himself. "We haven't had an escort after midnight on that side in a long time," he said, then added with a little smile that tried to let the world be easy. "Unless you met one of the old-timers." "What do you mean?" He shrugged. There's a tale about a crew that used to run that mountain when the tunnel was new. They kept trucks moving even when the clock said no. Folks say the road remembers good habits. If you see a follow me sign that looks older than the paint, you keep your wheels where it wants, and it'll put you where you intended to be. She waited for the punchline that would tell her she was the mark. It didn't come. The trooper rubbed his hands together against the cold and nodded at her as if they had agreed on something basic like weather or the usefulness of coffee. "Careful on the ice on the next ridge," he said. "It gets fiddly in the shade." She pulled back on. The downgrade took her the way a song takes a person who knows the chorus by heart. At the first turnout, she stopped just long enough to step down and look at the front of her truck. On the passenger side, tucked into the groove where the bumper met the fender, a strand of white ribbon had caught. It had tied itself into nothing but the knot it had been once, was square and sensible. She plucked it free and put it in the little slot near the dash where people put coins and fortunes from diners. Daylight found her on the far flats, the mountain now a grand idea in her mirrors. She asked a fuel clerk in a town with more outbuildings than houses whether anyone on the night shift talked about old escorts. The clerk smiled and said the crews told stories to keep their coffee hot. She asked a maintenance worker sweeping sand off the sidewalk, and he shrugged and said there had been pilots there before his time who liked things done right. Everyone was kind. Everyone let the night be as true as it needed to be. On runs after that, she noticed the little artifacts she'd missed before. Faded call boxes, standing polite beneath fresh mile markers. Stones in a retaining wall that had been painted once, their color now like the memory of a sunset. The way some tunnels kept their own weather, as if they were small worlds with soft rules. Sometimes, very late, she would see a rotating beacon rise out of a curve where no modern strobe lived, and feel her shoulders settle by a degree. It felt like being led by someone who had no interest in where she was going, only in how she got there. And when she climbed that particular pass again in the deep hours of a Tuesday and a pickup rolled into view with "Follow Me" glowing in a window instead of flashing in pixels, she didn't question the age of its paint or the cut of the cap in the driver's silhouette. She took the left lane where the cones asked her to. She tuned to channel 12 and listened to a voice that had the easy authority of someone who belonged to a place more than to a payroll. She kept it snug, kept it kind, and promised the black only what it was owed. Story number 4. He took the coastal shortcut when inland storms stacked like dark furniture against the mountains. The route was a ribbon of causeways and low bridges threading marsh and bay, where the air smelled of salt and eelgrass and the night wore a faint metallic taste. He knew this road by its sounds: the tire whisper on concrete joints, the small hollow knock where the deck changed to steel grating, the soft rattle of fencing that ran along the edge like a line of breath. The signs here were different from the plains and passes. Causeway, no shoulder. Bridge opens for marine traffic, expect delays. Wind advisory when beacon flashes. He liked the specificity of them. The sea made rules that were obvious and unapologetic. It was late enough that the horizon erased itself. The only lights were his, a buoy's blink out on the black, and distant pinpricks where a town slept with one eye open. The CB stayed on low out of habit. Mostly it was a comfort, a touchstone that let his mind rest on something human while the world thinned around him. Once in a while a fisherman would come through, voice dragging on Channel 9, swapping weather with a buddy on VHF. Skip did that sometimes. Signals snuck odd places on the back of night air. He didn't mind. Voices were welcome as long as they stayed gentle. The first drawbridge announced itself with a bell he could feel through the floor more than hear with his ears. A warm, old iron sound, steady and polite. Ding, ding, ding. He eased off the throttle a shade and watched the gantries ahead. The red lanterns were steady. The gates were up. No motion in the middle span. He breathed, settled back into pace, and let the hum return. Fog came and went, like the sea was practicing being sky. It gathered in the low parts, then thinned, then came back in a different shape. He kept a window cracked a finger's width and let the salt through. Far below, water curled around pilings in thin lace sounds. Somewhere out in the dark, a gull laughed once in its sleep. At mile marker 18, a sign popped up that he hadn't seen on this stretch before. Bridge tender sound horn for lift. The plaque beneath it said 1,000 feet. The instruction felt older than the billboard it rode in on. He glanced at the lift span ahead. The lanterns there were dark, the gantry arms like eyelids resting. He checked the clock. Did the time math he always did. and decided to pass the next turnout and take his chance with the bridge. If it opened, he'd wait. The night did that sometimes. Shrug. Wait. Go on. The CB hissed. Northbound rig on the trestle hold at the gate, please. The voice had that calm cadence people use when they work with water and machines, unflustered as if they had long ago learned that feelings never moved a bolt. He looked at the radio, then at the gantries again. The red lanterns clicked on with a gentle patience, two eyes waking. A small bell took up the beat, softer, closer, as if it were in his cab. Ding, ding, ding. He set his hazards a courtesy to nobody and everybody and rolled to the painted line. The deck in front of him changed texture. Concrete. Then the dark seam where the bascule began. Then steel grating that made the light bounce in tiny, neat rows. The air felt wetter here, even with the window barely open. It smelled of creosote and cold bolts. Keep your window cracked, the radio voice said in the same low volume. She fogs heavy in the throat. Don't set the brake hard on the grate. He didn't remember anyone manning the draw through the night anymore. The last time he'd crossed at 2 a.m., the shack had been dark, and a sign on the window said, Remote Operation Automated. He glanced at the tender's house now. A small, square building in pale paint. Windows lit with a greenish glow. A chair sat inside with nobody in it. A pot on a hot plate steamed once, and didn't steam again. He kept his foot on the service brake, and felt the rig's weight settle around him like responsibility in a familiar coat. The bell continued. Patient. Not hurrying anyone. The water below shifted in a pattern he couldn't map, currents moving in quiet V's around pilings like whispers finding their way to one another. A faint horn out on the bay gave a long call, then a short. The bridge answered with its bell 4 beats, a pause. 4 beats again, like an old greeting remembered by habit. The gantry arm stayed up. The span did not lift. He could see the line where it would split, the shoulder at the midpoint, the hinges where the world had been taught a trick. Nothing moved. The radio sighed with air. Then the same voice. 2 rigs for hold down would be kinder. Your wait is a favor. If any southbound comes, let him nose up to the line and sit. You'll feel it. He looked in his mirror. No southbound traffic in sight. Nothing but fog and more fog and the thin smudge of a channel marker light. He waited. He did not try to make sense of a thing until the road insisted. Somewhere in that quiet, a second set of lights approached from the far side, low, round, too warm in color to be new. They moved with an ease that belonged to a different era of springs and steering, and when they came close enough for him to pick out shape, he thought what he saw might be a long hood tractor pulling a short flatbed, the kind you didn't see much anymore except at shows. It rolled without hurry, and when it found the painted line opposite him, it settled as if it had been waiting for the chance. His cab rocked a hair. Not much. Just enough to feel the bridge find balance the way a person finds it on a boat, with 1,000 tiny adjustments that only become a story if they stop. The bell changed its note, same tempo, different timbre, the way a voice warms after a first sentence. Much obliged, the radio said, and in the place where a name usually lives, there was a simple pause instead. Hold, lights steady, no flash. He clicked off his hazards to make his beams into a constant, and for no good reason he could name, turned off the marker lights too, until only his low beams drew a careful triangle on the grate. Across the gap, the older truck did the same. The road between them became a short, honest darkness. Down in that square, something moved. Not a barge, not a sail. A small workboat perhaps, its running lights tucked low to the water, a soft glow that didn't push hard at the fog. He saw it because the water around it flattened in an oval as it passed, a smoothness among ripples. The bell matched its pace without looking. A tone shivered through the deck and set his toes tingling inside his boots. A bolt somewhere tightened. A hinge sighed, in a way that didn't carry fear at all. It sounded like ease. And then nothing spectacular. No lift. No show. The bridge simply became more bridge, the way a chest becomes more breath when someone in the habit of breathing takes care to do it well. On my 3, the voice said, as if counting was a kindness. 3, 2, 1. Ease forward to the seam. You'll feel a thump like a handshake. Keep it at 8, and don't stop on the crown. Other side after you. He rolled. The grate sang its little steel song under him. When his steers crossed the midpoint, he felt the thump exactly where the voice had promised, a soft, square bump that said, "You are where you should be." He let the rig do what rigs do well, and he did not hurry it. On the far side of the span, he gave 2 quick blinks of his trailer light's instinct, not code and saw, in his mirror, the older truck answer in kind. Polite, brief, enough. Past the gantries, the road returned to concrete, and the world widened a fraction. He checked his mirror to watch the far rig go, but fog slid between like a curtain and he saw nothing except the fade of his own red lights thrown back at him by air. He rolled past the tender's house. The windows were dark. The chair sat with its back at a different angle than before, or maybe it always had. The pot on the hot plate had no steam at all. On the door, a placard he hadn't noticed read "Night Operations Remote Monitor Only." Beneath it, a small ceramic bell hung by a bit of string. It moved a little when he passed, and made no sound. The causeway beyond was quieter than the one he'd crossed. The buoys blinked in a new rhythm, as if the tide had turned its shoulder. In his cab, the CB whispered a soft static that felt like silence choosing to be companionable. He took a breath and let it out without words attached. At the toll plaza where the causeway returned to land, a booth glowed like a kitchen light left on for someone who might be late. It had no attendant. These days, most didn't. He slowed anyway. An arm that had no reason to be polite lifted for him, as if it had been waiting to do that exact favor. As he rolled under, something caught between the dash and the windshield light paper flattened by air. He palmed it without thinking and tucked it near the shifter. Later, at the next wide spot where a pair of oaks bent over a gravel pullout, he unfolded it. It was a toll chit, the kind they used to print when crossings took coins in conversation. The ink had faded to a brownish gray. The font looked like the sort found on a typewriter ribbon near the end of its life. In a corner, a date. Not tonight's, but a night that sat back in the timeline far enough to feel like an old photograph. The amount due was $1.25. In the neat space, meant for a clerk's stamp, was a word. Cleared. He turned it over. On the back, a single, square grease thumbprint. It looked exactly like the kind you leave when you work with bolts, and then touch paper with your tool's brain still running. He drove on because that was the job. Marsh gave way to flat fields, and flat fields to a low town where porches faced one another across streets that had not given up their Christmas lights entirely. He delivered at a seafood processor that smelled of ice and lemons and patience. A man in a watch cap signed for the pallet and said, "Your timing's neat. Draw stuck earlier, had a tug under it for an hour." He said it like weather, like luck being a simple neighbor. On the return, at noon, he stopped by a public pier where pelicans waited for an easier living. The bridge looked smaller in the day, flatter, uncomplicated. The tender's house was locked. The sign on the door said the same as before. Inside, someone had set a framed photo on the window ledge crew from decades ago. Men in canvas coats with caps pulled low, smiling in a way workmen do when the camera catches them in a moment they don't expect to like. A brass bell hung above the photo with a ribbon tied to it, white and practical. A placard beneath read, "In appreciation of the night crews who kept the road and the water moving, and in memory of those who never let the span rest when it shouldn't." The afternoon tore the strangeness out of everything and left only work. He put fuel in the rig. He checked tires with his knuckles. He drove north along a different thread of land, one that might have been drawn by a different hand. When night came again, as it always does for people who make their living pulling lines through darkness, he turned the chit over once more in the easy glow of the dash. The paper held the faint smell of creosote, as if it had spent a long time near pilings. He slid it into the slot behind the visor, where important oddities lived until they found their reason. On other runs through that coast, long after the fog had changed its mind a dozen times, he noticed small, particular things. A bell whose note seemed a shade deeper when the tide ran strong. A sign whose paint was one revision behind the others. The way old gratings sang different than new. Once, stalled for 10 minutes while the span rose and fell like a slow breath, he heard a voice on the radio ask some other truck to "give me your weight for a moment," in the same calm tone that had spoken to him. The other driver replied with a simple, "Copy." Nobody crowed about it. Nobody made it a legend. They did a thing, and then the road moved again. He never saw the older truck again except in a flash of memory, when a set of round headlights hummed past in the rain. He never saw an attendant in the tender's house when he crossed alone at 2. But more than once his window fogged just at the center span, as if the air there had a different idea of condensation. He would crack it a little, let the salt slip in, and feel not watched, not judged, accompanied. There are places where the job needs you to be awake and steady more than anywhere else, and those places sometimes lean back, sometimes they help. Was it odd? It was. Was it scary? Only in the way deep water is neutral and sure, carrying stories in its own tongue. The bell's tempo stayed kind. The fog changed its mind when it wanted to. The bridge remembered how to be bridge. He crossed. He did again. And when the night pushed the sea up around the pilings and the span asked for good habits, he let his weight be a favor, and his hands be gentle on the wheel. Story number 5. The high desert at night felt like a giant, empty theater. A black dome sky. A floor of pale asphalt stitched with white dashes that ticked past like steady metronome marks. Sagebrush gathered in humps along the shoulder, and low volcanic hills crouched further off, the color of cooled coal. He drove the long straight that people like to call the loneliest stretch, though he never thought of it as lonely. It was attentive in its own way. It listened. The rig was in good temper engine content, coolant happy, tires with a just right hiss on the aggregate. The dash lights were soft and even. On the passenger seat, a paper sack with a sandwich sat polite and ignored, and in the door pocket a bottle of water nudged against a folded map that had survived 3 trucks and a change of owners. The CB rested on 19, turned down low, just enough to hear if someone out there needed a voice to bounce off of. The night's wind came from the south. It wasn't a push so much as a long exhale across the land, and it brought with it a dust-sweet smell, the kind the desert kept tucked away and only let loose when nobody else was watching. He clicked the window open a finger width and let it slip through. A sign floated up in the headlights. Next services 82 miles. He checked his fuel. Plenty. He liked doing the mental arithmetic even when there was no pressure to do it. It passed the time without taking up space in his head. At the edge of the radio band, something whispered. Not the CB. The AM dial, always a little haunted after midnight, gave him a thread of voice under a quilt of static. He thumbed the truck's radio over and rolled through the numbers, past stations selling mattresses, past a preacher who sang between sentences, past Spanish love songs that sounded like midnight feels even if a person didn't know the words. At 1,610, a frequency he knew sometimes carried travelers' advisories near big interchanges, a calm voice lifted out of the hiss and settled. This is Tower 9, Arroyo County Travelers Information. Conditions at this hour: light south wind, gusts to 25. Visibility variable. Sand drifts reported along the center line between markers 206 and 211. If you're approaching the flats, maintain lane discipline and avoid stopping on the crown. Repeat. Avoid stopping on the crown. The voice was not a recording. It had a small breath in it, the sound of a person choosing words. It clipped syllables the way people do who grew up in the region. Vowels turned to long, dry riverbeds. He glanced at the mile marker that stepped out of the dark like a polite usher. 198. The numbers lined up enough to feel like coincidence with opinions. He'd never heard Tower 9 out here. The traveler's station he knew sat near a county line 40 miles back, and it spoke in loops about rest areas and litter laws. This voice wasn't looping. It paused. It added a thing that hadn't been in the last sentence. Bluebird Rest Area water is shut at this time. Portable toilets available near the east entrance. Trash pickup delayed. Please pack out your waste. If the beacon at the turnout flashes red, continue to the shelter pull-off at marker 204. Do not linger on the shoulder where the wires sing. He relaxed his hands on the wheel. He wasn't spooked, just attentive. The desert had its ways of asking for attention, the sudden white of a jackrabbit, a tumbleweed with too much enthusiasm, a low cow with a dark hide blending into dark. If a voice wanted to add itself to the list of helpful things, he didn't mind. The flats ahead showed in the way the sky darkened differently above them, a deeper band where heat had left the day and taken its mirage with it. The air went smoother. The lane lines looked cleaner, like new paint laid over rough honesty. He scanned both horizons. Nothing obvious. A hint of dust did tilt the far stars, a smear that smudged the bottom of the Big Dipper. The sign for Bluebird Rest Area appeared where it always did. A square with a little sleeping figure. Arrow pointing right. A strip of smaller text with the sort of rules people knew and forgot. A beacon mounted to its post blinked a slow, thoughtful yellow. Not red. He could have stopped if he'd wanted. He didn't. He wasn't tired. He had a rhythm. He kept it. A minute later, the world ahead turned into a suggestion. Not suddenly. The change came like fog, except it wasn't wet. The stars above remained sharp, but the headlight beam found itself full of lace, the fine dust that the desert kept like flour in a jar and sometimes threw over the counter. He eased back to a speed that made sense for not knowing the next 10 seconds. Calm. No drama. The dust wasn't thick enough to hide the road, just enough to make the edges harder to trust. The radio's voice returned, unhurried. Wall forming near 205 westbound. We recommend use of the Starfield turnout. If you're north lane, that's your right at the double post marker with cat's eyes in pairs. Angle your hood east. Keep low beams. Do not use hazards inside the wall. Save battery for restart. He almost smiled at Starfield turnout. It sounded like something someone would name a favorite place where they took kids to lie on a blanket. He had never seen a turnout by that name on this stretch. He watched anyway. The dust thickened with a personality. It wanted to be respected. He flicked his wipers up once and cleared the fine that had sketched itself onto the glass. The lane hummed under the tires. The centerline cat's eyes, those little glass reflectors, shone back like mild, patient eyes as he passed. 2 posts rose from the right shoulder, painted white in segments, each topped with twin reflectors that returned his light as tidy coins. Between them, a shallow apron of compacted gravel lay open like a palm, its surface smoothed by someone who cared about level. He took it without overthinking. The turnout felt like a plan other drivers had used well. He angled the truck as told so the nose faced east, away from the worst of the wind. He set the brake at a click less than he would in rain, just enough. He dimmed his lights to low and then to off. The cab became a small pod in a moving universe. The dust wall arrived like a curtain being pulled by a polite stagehand. The air went a shade darker, then darker again. Grit ticked the glass with a sound too small to worry about. The truck rocked gently as if someone pushed with a broad, steady hand, and then held. The world smelled like old books and far hills. He heard something he'd never noticed in a dust storm before: the faintest singing from the fence line, barbed wire running a note in the wind, a music made by tension and distance. On 1,610, the voice of Tower 9 changed shape, softer around the consonants, kinder still. You're good where you are. Let it pass. If you need company, there are 4 rigs with you in the field. They're pointed like you are. You won't see them. Don't worry yourself about that. They're there. Breathe. He didn't check the mirrors. He let the idea be enough. He could swear he felt the hush of brakes from neighbors he couldn't see. A chorus of big machines making the same small, respectful sound. It was not lonely. The radio filled the time with practical things, and a kind of weather he hadn't heard since he was a kid in the back seat. A jingle about keeping a spare gallon of water in summer, a reminder to check your lug nuts after rough stretches, a suggestion that if you're hauling animals you pull curtains early so their eyes can make sense of dusk. Between items, a tone pinged low, soft, like a submarine in a movie deciding it would rather stay undiscovered. Minutes went by uncounted. His ELD screen kept its own counsel, busy with the gentle certainty of math. The dust thinned the way snow sometimes does, by leaving the air in delicate layers. He cracked the window for a second and shut it again, just to prove to himself that the invisible still smelled right. Walls walking past marker 208 now, the voice said. Those at 204 and 205, prepare to roll. Take your time. Let your eyes make their deal with the dark. No sudden bright. He turned his lights to low. The world returned in increments. The idea of a road, the literal road, the brush with a little dust laid over it like flour on a cutting board, the the sky retaking the stars. He listened for other engines and heard them without hearing them, felt them more, a resonance in the chassis that felt like community. He eased out of the turnout and set the nose back onto the asphalt. The truck found its line like a horse finding a trail it knew. He brought the speed to a number that read sensible and let the gears move only when they were ready. The voice on 1610 gave one more note, then faded. If you're northbound beyond the flats, you're clear. Bluebird's water will be on by morning. Thank you for driving kind. The frequency went to static, then to a faraway station, selling seeds to people who still believed in catalogs. He rolled the dial to quiet and let the tires do their talk. At the next wide load pull out a long strip of safe gravel with a view of nothing but sky, he stopped for 5 minutes to let the truck's muscles unknot. The stars above felt closer now, dust making them burn a little redder. He shut the engine, and the land made a sound he'd heard since he was a kid. The afternoise of the world, the click of cooling, the outbreath of heat lifting from stone. On the signpost at the center of the pullout, someone had affixed a little metal plaque. It wasn't official. It was tidy. It read, Tower 9 Information Station, 1970, 1999. Volunteers kept travelers safe during storms. If you hear them, say thank you and keep moving. A line drawing of a radio mast decorated the bottom, simple and earnest. He ran his glove over the metal and felt the etched grooves. Back in the cab, he pulled the old paper map from the door pocket and unfolded it across his knees. There, north of a dry riverbed on a faint line of county road, a dot had been marked sometime long ago. Tower 9 Tis. Beside it, his own pen from a different year had scribbled a grocery list that now looked like a note from someone else. In the morning, he asked a woman in a cafe at the edge of a small town about the plaque. She poured coffee with the clean efficiency of people who had worked this road long enough to know the shape of every stranger's tired. My aunt ran that station, she said. They had a shed by the old substation and a wire up the hill. When dust blew or lightning tripped the line, they'd talk all night. County tried to automate it later, but the transmitter burned, and that was that. Some drivers still swear they hear the old reports when the air gets right. Makes them slow down. That's all it has to do. He nodded. She added 2 little sealed creamers without asking, the way people who know long nights add small kindnesses without needing permission. He ate his sandwich there, instead of in the cab. On other runs, the desert kept being itself. Sometimes the wind ran like a rumor and did nothing. Sometimes the dust made lace again. A few nights, flipping through the AM band to stay awake the honest way, he'd catch that calm voice at 1610. If you're near marker 187, mind the open range. Cattle test fences this season, or wires singing at the basin tonight. Avoid parking within 30 feet of the fence line. Once he heard his own habits reflected back to him. If you have water, take a sip. It made him laugh in quiet, and then obey. He never saw a mast, never saw a lit shed, never found a person to thank. He did find evidence that people had stood there with purpose. At a roadside crossroad, a small sign had been lettered by hand and bolted to the back of a county marker, Tower Road. It pointed into scrub and vanished. In a thrift store in a town that had changed streets twice and never changed its post office door, a wooden plaque hung above a shelf of dishes. Thank you. Night crew. He read it as if it were a prayer. On the long, late nights, when the desert asked its drivers to be clever and calm, he learned something else. Some places simply stayed awake. They learned people's routes. They noticed who slowed at the right moments. They kept a voice ready, the tone you use with skittish horses and the wind. If the air carried that voice now and then with the same ease it carried dust, he didn't call it strange. He called it a favor returned by an old road that had been paid attention to. Once, months later, he took a rookie along the flats, a kid who kept glancing at the sky as if it might fall. Dust showed at the edges. The kid's hands twitched on the dash. He turned the AM dial to 1610 and let the hiss sit there, patient. When the calm voice arrived, Starfield turnout is clear. Breathe and wait it. The kid exhaled, like he'd been given permission by someone who knew. Afterward, back on the main line, the kid said, "Who is that?" He shrugged and said, "Locals." He kept the paper map folded to the page with the old dot, a reminder that the land had its own ways of looking out for people who carried weight in the dark. If he drove that way and the dust made the fence sing, he cracked the window just enough to hear it, a thin silver tone stretched between posts, a song that matched the band on 1,610 inches a key he couldn't name. He would listen, and he would keep moving. Story number 6. He followed a river through bottomland where the night lay low, and the air smelled like damp iron. On his right, a single railroad line kept him company, riding a levee a few feet higher than the highway, its ballast a pale ribbon under starlight. Here, towns were more suggestion than place porches tucked behind sycamores, a grain elevator standing like a white thumb against the dark. The road ran straight between crossings, each marked by a crossbuck and lights that sat quiet until something larger than the night asked them to blink. He kept the cab calm. AM radio low, CV lower. The engine's tone settled into that warm, almost humming sweet spot where it made more music than noise. He left the window cracked just enough for a cool thread of air to trace his cheek and carry the slow river smell. A heron lifted off a ditch and vanished, a folded sentence disappearing into the black. Near mile marker 143, a voice slid across his speakers as if it had been waiting just off stage. It was clear, clipped, and oddly formal, the kind of tone used by systems and people who had practiced their announcements for a long time. Detector, milepost 322.7. Track 1. Ambient 5. 3 degrees. No defects. No defects. No. He smiled before he realized he'd heard hotbox detectors and dragging equipment detectors plenty of times over the years. Voices that told freight crews their axles ran cool and their trains were healthy. They lived on rail frequencies, not on a trucker's radio. Sometimes they bled into the AM band, the way lightning will make itself known on any wire it can find. It wasn't strange. It was part of the territory, the river, the rails, the road, and the little ghosts of useful sound that hung around them all. The line and the highway ran together like old friends. He rolled past a closed feed store with a faded mural of a red cow stenciled across the brick. A sign at a side road read, "Quiet zone, no train horns." The night settled lower at the edges. He didn't mind. He liked nights that asked him to pay attention without panic. Fog began to gather thin and silvery on the flats, pooling in the low places and lifting at the crowns. The crossing arms at County 12 appeared out of the haze with their red circles steady and off. He dipped his beams to keep the world small and clear. "Dispatcher to Local 582, a different voice said. Not a recorded machine, but a man with night in his words. The radio carried him as if the speaker sat half a mile away on the rails instead of in a distant office. "You've got a crossing malfunction at the county road after the bend. Flag the road. Do not foul the intersection. Until you've got eyes on both lanes." He didn't have a rail scanner turned on. He hadn't even set the AM dial to anything but a faint country station. The voice threaded through anyway, and settled in the cab like a polite passenger. "Copy the crossing," another voice said, low, practical. "We'll flag." He eased off the throttle a hair, and let the rig decelerate the way a good machine likes. No drama, no swerve. The next crossing lay a half-mile ahead. Its lights were sleeping. The arms sat at attention, but not down. The fog between him and it held, not thick enough to blind, just enough to make edges dishonest. He checked left, checked right. No headlight glowed on the levee. The rail steel shone darkly like a quiet pool. He rolled closer, foot ready, and mind ahead of the truck by a careful second. Something pale moved at the throat of the crossing. Not the quick snap of a deer. A slow, human motion, letting itself be seen. A hand lamp swung a small arc up, down the old-fashioned pattern that means stop in any place people take machines seriously. The light wasn't LED white. It had a warmer color that made him think of lanterns and winter breath. He stopped with easy brakes and a small nod to the idea that someone else was working as carefully as he was. The cab sat still. The world quieted into the kind of hush that means things are being made safe. In the fog, a dark mass slid across the crossing in low profile, a cut of cars rolling under a shove at walking pace. Their wheels whispered more than ground. No horn, no chatter but the faintest metal sigh on polished rail. "Thank you, highway," the voice said into the night, maybe to a crewman on the far side, maybe to him. He wouldn't swear to either. Hold just one more. He held. A man in a vest stepped out from the haze and lifted a hand. Palm out a courtesy flag in a human shape. The last car cleared the far side. The man gave the universal go-ahead motion, a push through air that meant exactly what a green light would mean, and turned away without looking to see if he was obeyed. Trust, not presumption. He rolled on. The radio fell back to a quiet the way water settles behind a boat when the boat moves away. 2 crossings later, the detector spoke again. Detector, milepost 320, 3.1, ambient 5 to 2 degrees. Total axles 416, no defects. It crackled and repeated itself, the way those units did. The specificness pleased him, even if the numbers belonged to a train he could not see. Past the grain elevator, a narrow county bridge took the highway over a feeder creek. The fog there coiled up from the water and turned the far shore into a sketch. He felt the faint pull of the river's own air pushing against his lane, a whisper of a crosswind that wanted to test him. He answered with steadiness and a slight touch, same as he would answer a child who wanted a high shelf. Detector, the voice said again a few minutes later, softer this time as if it had learned how his cab held sound. Highway eastbound at 146, check wheel end temperature axle, 3 left feels warm. He blinked at the radio, not because it was frightening, but because the mind likes to separate useful from impossible. A detector that could feel a truck's wheel was not a story he'd ever been told. He coasted to the wide apron at a gravel approach and put on his 4 ways out of habit, the polite language of people who share night. Outside, the air met him cool and clean. He knelt beside axle 3, left with the same mild care he used for everything heavy. He reached up and put a hand near the hub without touching, waiting, listening to the heat with his palm the way old mechanics had taught him. It wasn't hot. It was warmer than its brother on the right. A bungee had slipped from where he'd tucked it at the yard and draped itself near the drum. It hadn't cut. It hadn't melted. It had simply leaned where it shouldn't, and borrowed heat it had no right to. He moved it back to its place and cinched it more intelligently. He stood and felt a little silly, then not silly at all. Back in the seat, he didn't say thank you out loud. He did look at the radio like looking might be a word. The road and the rails ran closer now, shadows traveling side by side. The quiet zone sign came up again, and he watched the crossbucks for waking. The night did what good nights do. Got darker for a while, got less complicated strangely. He kept his speed as steady as the line and listened to the world breathe. At the outskirts of a small town where the streetlights wore orange like an old photograph, the crossing ahead glowed a steady red. No arms moved. The lights didn't flash in that familiar 2-beat cadence. They stared, patient and constant. He slowed to a stop well before the line and waited. The detector voice came not from the speakers this time, but from the idea of the place, as if the ballast and ties had learned English. Occupancy. Hold. Occupancy. Headlights slipped up behind him, a sedan whose driver likely knew the road by old habit. He held his left palm out the way his father had done at farm driveways. Open hand. Calm. Don't try it. The sedan drifted off the throttle and settled in behind him, content to follow whoever had decided to be wise first. He rolled down his window another half-inch. Somewhere not far away, a wheel ticked a frog metal on metal, a tone with a little song in it. A slow shove nudged a string of cars across the invisible intersection. Their presence barely moved the fog. He waited, not because he feared what would happen if he didn't, but because waiting was the simplest form of respect. When the last wheel cleared the opposite rail, the red eyes turned to nothing. The road went blind again, which is to say honest. He eased across, careful, as if he were stepping over a sleeping dog. At the fuel stop 20 miles on, under lights that turned moths into generous shapes, he asked a man in a reflective jacket who was topping off a bucket truck, "You hear the detectors out here on the AM?" The man scratched the edge of his cap. "Sometimes," he said. "We got a couple of old talkers that will come through anything if the air gets thin enough. Flood years do weird things to cable. You hear them right, and they'll keep you out of trouble. My granddad used to say the wires remember the words that save people." He took his coffee and let that sentence ride along with him. A week later, different load, same river. A northbound freight matched his speed a mile out to his right, a shadow with a heartbeat. He listened for the detector and it came, steady as a church. "Detector, Milepost 325.4. Track 1. Temperature 5 to 0. Total axles 212. A pause. Then, threaded through as if someone had leaned toward a microphone and not moved their mouth at all. Highway cattle on the road 2 crossings ahead. He almost laughed. Not because of the warning, but because of the way the ordinary and the unlikely had learned to share space in his night. He took a breath, put a shade of extra distance between himself and the idea of what comes next, and found the herd exactly where anyone who grew up near fences would have guessed they'd be. A dozen dark bodies standing with the patience of creatures who think the road is a warmer place than dust. He stopped. He waited. A teenager in a ball cap loped up from the ditch with a flashlight and a length of rope, cheeks flushed with the long embarrassment of animals. The cows went on their way with the bland certainty of beings who will never change to suit us. By the time he reached the interstate split where the river let the land rise, he had begun to make a small habit. When the rails were in sight and the fog lay down, he'd click the AM dial up and let a little static in. He didn't go hunting for anything. He didn't have to. If it had something to say, it would use the path of least resistance, like water and electricity and the better kind of advice. He asked once at a depot near a yard where a switcher hummed like a bee that had made peace with its work. The yardmaster leaned against a doorframe and looked at the sky, as if the answer were up there. "We swapped the talkers out years back," he said. "New ones don't have much personality. The old cabinets are still on the posts down past the curve. If you take a look in daylight, you can see where lightning ran down the Faraday. New ones." End of lied. Newonesladder.com. Conduit. A couple units burned clean through. Didn't stop them. They'd say their piece with the lid missing. "No one minds?" he asked. "Mind what?" the yardmaster said, and gave him a grin meant to let the night keep a little of itself. He kept rolling the same stretch now and then because freight networks and freight lives arranged themselves that way, following the predictable seam between 2 slow rivers. He learned the people who worked the track by the way they moved a lamp. He learned the crossings by the different short songs the rails made when wheels found a joint. Sometimes nothing spoke. The detectors did their job for trains alone, and the only voice in his cab belonged to the engine. On other nights, a phrase would arrive at the exact moment it mattered. "Hold at the county road," or "Wind at the trestle is stronger than it thinks it is," or once, when snow had erased the contrast between track and lane, and the world had gone quiet as sleep, "Stop and breathe." He didn't try to map it. He didn't try to name it. Names would have made it tinier, and the best parts of the road did not deserve to be made small. He did what the job ass steered, watched, eased the big machine through human spaces with human care, and let the line beside him be an old neighbor who knew when to knock on the wall. At the end of that winter, parked for a half hour at a diner whose pie case glowed like a constellation, he unfolded his paper napkin and found, under the sugar shaker, a coaster printed for a railroad anniversary years earlier. In small print at the bottom, a line read, "Dedicated to the men and women who listened for trouble and spoke in time." He slid it into the visor, next to other small proofs that the night paid attention to the people who respected it. On runs after, when fog pooled low and the rails kept close, he would hear the detector at odd mileposts call out, proper as a bell, and if a second, gentler note tucked itself in a word meant for a truck instead of a train, he treated it like any good handoff. He caught it. He carried it. He passed it on by not making a mess of the road. And on the rare nights when the crossbuck stared steady red and the arms didn't lift and some small warm light moved like a lantern in the fog, he put his foot where it belonged. He waited with patience he had saved for just such a purpose. And he let the river, the rail, and the road share the same stretch of dark without argument. Story number 7. Night on the turnpike made its own kind of order. Wide lanes, soft shoulders, glass, smooth pavement, reflecting a low harvest of light from overhead signs. He liked it. The toll road flowed like a quiet river that had learned how to keep itself straight, and the service plazas, spaced like mileposts for weary people, were little islands of brightness he could choose or ignore. A green board blinked up from the dark. Next plaza, 34 miles. He glanced at his hours. His brake window was opening. A stop would be smart. A few minutes later, a smaller sign appeared that he didn't remember from this stretch. Satellite Plaza, 1 mile. He frowned, not in worry but curiosity. The main plaza he knew sat another half hour up the road. A satellite, maybe a smaller, older facility still hanging on. The arrow pointed to a gentle ramp that peeled off like a polite thought. He took it. The ramp curled through a stand of trees that kept themselves trimmed, as if the wind had done them the favor. The asphalt was clean, the paint fresh enough to hold a crisp line. As it unwound, the plaza came into view. A low brick building set between the eastbound and westbound lanes, connected by a glassed-in pedestrian bridge that crossed the highway. The bridge looked like the kind they used to build square, with frames painted the kind of white that turns to cream under decades of fluorescent light. It hovered over the road like a museum display of future from years ago. The lot held a few cars in corners and 2 trucks nose-in on the far side. He pulled into a designated long vehicle space, under a light that hummed contentedly, and made the concrete glow, faintly blue. He shut down, wrote a quick note in his log, and sat for a second with his hands on the wheel while the engine's heat moved where it liked. Even from here, he could see into the building glass walls revealed a row of vending machines lit up like small stages, a coffee kiosk with a tidy counter, and a set of double doors leading to the bridge. The place was lit, as if midday had been imported in small, polite amounts. No human figures wove through it. The absence felt more like timing than abandonment. He stepped down, and the night air met him in the way the turnpike always let it: cleaner than city, cooler than field, a faint bit of ozone from the lamps. A breeze lifted the hem of a flag on a short pole by the entrance, old fabric moving as if it were still learning how to be a flag in this particular wind. The glass doors whooshed open as he approached. Inside, the lobby was bright without being harsh. Tile underfoot, the sort with flecks that hide the years. A mural in ceramic depicted the turnpike under construction. Men in hard hats posing beside a paver. Children holding balloons. A car model that now lived in parades. From the ceiling, a low speaker carried a loop of music, not quite a song's soft keys, and an occasional chime. The kind of sound meant to keep people's shoulders from climbing up to their ears. Over it, a calm female voice spoke. "Attention, travelers, restrooms are to your left. Coffee service is available at all times. Please watch your step near changing weather mats." He took a step specifically to see if a mat lay where it shouldn't. It did, aligned perfectly, its edge taped. The voice had not steered him wrong. At the coffee counter, a small sign read "Exact Change Appreciated." A tip jar sat empty except for a folded paper sleeve printed with an old plaza logo, an outline of the bridge, and a simple star. He poured a cup from a stainless dispenser. The coffee came hot and steady, neither too dark nor embarrassed about being strong. A napkin dispenser gave up a square, imprinted with the same star. A map rack stood nearby, the kind of metal tree that rotates. He touched it, and it moved with a satisfying resistance. The maps were of the sort agencies had stopped printing, county by county, annotated with points of interest and small icons for fire towers, covered bridges, scenic overlooks. On top lay a glossy trifold for East Park Service Plaza Dining and Fuel, printed in the tidy style of 20 years ago. He pocketed it without motive. There were sounds, vending spirals winding, a distant sneeze of a soda machine that created the sense of company. Overhead, the voice returned, as if noticing him in a helpful way. "If you are parking in the far bay, please check your hood latches. Crosswinds expected after midnight. Bridge walk is closed at this time." He smiled despite himself. He had not planned to touch the hood. He had no reason to distrust it. But a suggestion like that wasn't intrusive. It was the sort of thing his grandfather would call neighborly. He walked out the west door, crossed the painted crosswalk, and put his fingers to each latch. The left one gave a quarter inch. Not open. Not right either. He secured it until the spring sighed, and the catches felt true. He checked the right and found it stout. He tapped both, the way a person knocks on wood, not to invite ghosts, but to make conversation with good sense. From the walkway above, a faint movement. He looked up. The bridge was lit, rows of fluorescent tubes humming away with that quiver of age, but a chain hung across the entrance with a sign, "Closed after 9 p.m. Behind the glass, a mural of state birds looked back, painted with care. No one crossed. A family on the far side might never have been there at all. He took his coffee back to the truck and set his timer for a 30-minute break. The cab became a small place with his breath in it. He sipped, flipped through the trifold he'd taken, and found a layout of a plaza that wasn't quite the one outside the restaurant options listed tenants that had long since changed names. The gas brand bore a logo retired before his niece was born. Yet the phone number for Plaza office matched the tollway authority's prefix today. When he finished the cup, he stepped out again to stretch. The other two trucks sat in their spaces, without turning into proof of anything. One had an old livery he recognized from a defunct firm, a neat script he'd always liked. The other wore no markings at all, just silver paint that caught the light like water. He walked a slow loop and listened to the small hums, the mechanical confessions of machines cooling, the low breath of a rooftop unit's fan, the distant hiss of tires on the main line outside the trees. Inside the plaza, the voice spoke twice more during his break. Once, "If you've left sunglasses at the newsstand, please return to claim." And again, "Please avoid leaving belongings in the walkway. Cleaning in progress." He did not see a newsstand. He did not see a mop or bucket. He did not see a person who would care. He threw his cup away. The trash can swallowed it with the polite ease of something designed for exactly that. On the bulletin board by the door, beneath notices about winter tire requirements, and a flyer for an antique show dated 3 summers ago, someone had pinned a photograph of the plaza from an era when the glass bridge was new. The photo's edge had a scalloped white border. In it, 2 attendants in uniforms stood near a payphone bank, smiling with their chins lifted as if they had been taught that posture in a class. On the back, facing the glass, a line of handwriting showed through vaguely. The ink had bled time into the paper. He checked the clock. Break met. He felt more awake than coffee alone could excuse. The lot didn't seem to ask him to stay longer. As he rolled toward the exit, the calm voice spoke once more. "Attention. Truck parking area strap tails observed near rear axle on bay 4. Secure to avoid loss." He looked at his mirror, out of habit more than belief, and saw the end of a strap. His strap snaking a little in the air behind the last tandem. It would not have gone anywhere dramatic. It might have unspooled more. He pulled up, set the brake, walked back, and snugged it under itself until it lay flat and agreed with the night. He stood for a second longer, looking at the shadow of his trailer on the pavement. It looked like a thing behaving itself. He took the ramp back to the turnpike. As he merged, he glanced up at the pedestrian bridge. Lights glowed inside, steady across the span. The glass reflected his own headlights for a moment, then returned to just glass. Half a mile out, the wind shifted. It ran crosswise to the lanes with a little more muscle than the forecast had promised, a steady shove that made lighter vehicles bobble. He watched a van ahead correct once, twice, then find its posture. He felt as if a hand he hadn't seen had just turned his chin gently in the right direction. An hour later, he passed the main service plaza, newer, fuller, bristling with modern signs. He took the exit not to stop, but to ask a question. At the information desk, a woman in a blue vest with a laminated badge that read Karen looked up from a crossword. Behind her, a corkboard held the usual notices, and a poster celebrated the plaza's 10th anniversary last spring. "Is there a small plaza back near mile 212? He asked. Saw signs for a satellite, glass bridge over the road. She tilted her head. "There used to be," she said. "Garden View Plaza, closed when they rebuilt this one. The bridge was torn down 5 years ago, maybe 6. They trucked it out in pieces." She thought. "We kept a display case for a while. Old tokens, a brochure. Folks like the nostalgia." She smiled. "You saw a sign?" "Saw the place," he said, and let his tone make it a casual curiosity rather than an argument with reality. She brightened in the polite way people do when they think a person has spotted history. "You can still get off there for emergency parking," she said. "We get calls about the exit. The lot's gated most nights. No power. They said they'd put in a picnic area, but the budget went thin." She looked past him at a family constellation debating snacks. "You doing okay on hours?" "Fine," he said, meaning more than that word would carry. He bought a bottle of water in gratitude and left. Back on the highway, the sky lightened at the edges with a gray that made trees into careful silhouettes. He ran smooth. The strap he had tucked stayed tucked. The hood stayed down. The crosswind had its sport and moved on. At a later fuel stop, Under sunlight, he unfolded the trifold brochure he'd taken. The paper was thicker than the usual flimsy giveaway. The map inside showed a layout Garden View Plaza, with a bridge drawn in crisp lines, a news nook, a coffee corner, a payphone bank. In small print near the spine, revised 1998. At the bottom, a line. "We are open for you. Thank you for driving safe." He asked a toll attendant on a later run, someone who had a knack for the parts of the road not written down about Garden View. "They shut her down after the rebuild," the attendant said, leaning on the edge of the booth. "Old one got tired. Folks told stories about the bridge singing in the wind. I liked it. Made you feel the road was one piece you could walk over." He paused. "Sometimes a sign glitch will light it up on the boards. Nobody knows why the message fires. Disconnected system in a back room somewhere." He smiled. "If it lit you in, I hope you got a good cup." He had. He had also taken a coffee sleeve with the little star and the outline of a bridge that, according to all available evidence, had been exiled to photos. It sat now in the slot behind his visor with the tickets and notes he kept, as if they could decide to become meaningful later. On other nights, if his route and hours aligned, he watched that mile for the green Satellite Plaza sign. Most nights, nothing. One night, a blinking arrow and the word "closed" under it, as if someone had done the work of remembering to be firm. Once, weeks later, the sign glowed again, and the ramp waited with generous paint, and he took it for reasons he would have called curiosity if asked. The plaza was there, as tidy as before. The music was the same almost song. The voice spoke once, "Welcome." It did not say anything else. He sat in the lobby and watched a vending machine drop a spiral down by 1 inch, and then rise, as if it were stretching. It wasn't frightening. It was the way some long places are aware. He left with his straps snug and his latches accounted for, and the idea that the road sometimes keeps extra rooms lit for late arrivals. If a building that had already been folded into someone else's memory wanted to do that job one more night, he wasn't going to make it into a problem. He would keep his lane. He would keep his time. And if the bridge above the lanes had, for a few moments of a few nights, decided it was still connected to both sides of a road, he was happy to drive beneath it and feel the overhead windows hold the reflection of his lights, the way water does a quick, bright witness to a traveler passing through. Story number 8. The plains were already winter before the calendar admitted it. Grass lay flat and pale, the kind of color that remembers sun but doesn't expect it soon. He ran the overnight across a long, level state where snow fences stood in neat armies and high wind area signs broke up the horizon like quiet warnings spoken by a friend. The engine was content, the heater a steady companion, the glass clean, the dash a soft constellation. It was a road for patient hands and unshowy decisions. The forecast had talked about a front dropping down hard after midnight. He liked fronts. They were honest. They arrived like a line marching across the sky, and they said what they meant. Still, there's a difference between hearing it and feeling the first fingertip of cold tap the mirror and draw a small invisible line down the window, as if the night itself were writing something simple and true. Now, 10 miles beyond a ranch exit with no services, the wind came up. Not in gusts those he could lean against, but in a long push that made fence wires sing and drift lines draw themselves out of the ditches. The big sign on a metal arm read "Gate may close during storm." A pair of red lenses hung there like sleepy eyes. Beyond it, the highway ran straight as good sense. He kept the window cracked just enough to hear the edge of the world. Snow, not flakes, but fine. Dry sugar began to race low across the lanes. A ground blizzard that erased nothing and concealed everything at once. The stars were still clear above, though trouble lived at knee height. He tipped the low beams down, found the rumble strip with a feather of tire, and relaxed the part of his shoulders that wanted to try too hard. A mile marker appeared where it should 421, and then a smaller square. Shelter 4, Miles Blue Lamp. He had not seen that sign in years, not here. Some counties had once put them up at churches and schools, places with heat and bathrooms that opened when storms made simple travel arrogant. Most had been retired when budgets thinned and cell phones multiplied. The words were old and tidy. The arrow pointed one notch right of straight. He made his choice sooner than the weather would make it for him. 4 miles was a long time in a white that had decided to be creative. He eased back to a speed that felt like courtesy and let the truck be heavy in a way that helped instead of hurt. The CB was quiet. The AM band only carried the restless breath of static between far towns. The ELD held calm blue and minded its own numbers. The front arrived like a door closing a room. Snow leaped from the shoulder, and the world narrowed to a safe, short tunnel of light. He used the right-hand delineators like a rosary. White, 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 a gap, then another white. The gate at the next interchange sat open, red lenses dark. He took the ramp. The wind slid around the cab and then away, like something tested and found manageable. At the top of the loop, the county road met him at a diagonal. Its edges were less sure, its middle a suggestion, but the sign was there. Blue lamp shelter. 2 miles. Arrow pointing along a line of cottonwoods that held their own snow. He steered into it like a handshake. The truck settled into a slower hum. The trailer followed with the loyalty of a well-packed animal. He saw the lamp before he saw the building. A blue glow above the horizon. Small. Moth-like. Stubborn. The light didn't blink. It pulsed, not in impatience, but in the way a lighthouse says yes, yes, yes in slow syllables all night long. Between them, snow fence slats stood in endless rows, their shadows marching with him. The wind pushed plumes in neat scallops over the fence tops. The world reduced itself to the useful. He appreciated it for that. The shelter was an old schoolhouse, one of the square ones that sat on a small rise, as if all knowledge needed a footing. The lamp hung over the front door, a metal shade the shape of a bell, glowing a generous, deep blue that landed on snow like soft paint. A sign next to the door read, "County Emergency Shelter Open During Weather Events." The font belonged to another decade. The paint on the trim had flaked and been scraped and flaked again. The steps were swept by wind and by a shovel before that. He could see the logic of it in the clean lines. He parked in the lee of the building, nose into the wind, trailer straight, the way a person sets a chair so it won't catch a draft. He set the brake 1 click lighter than summer habit, and shut down to a purr for heat. He stepped down into the small storm. The air bit just enough to make decisions crisp. When he tugged on the schoolhouse door, it gave with a rubber gasket sigh. Warm air met him, smelling faintly of mop water and old books, and the metallic, good smell heat makes when it leans into winter. Inside, a vestibule held hooks and a corkboard. On the board, laminated instructions, neat under thumbtacks. Register your party. Name, time, vehicle, notes. A desk sat beneath with a pencil tied to it by string and a logbook with its own quiet authority. The last entries were years ago, names written in careful block letters during an April storm that had caught a dozen travelers. Before that, a winter with a winter's sense of humor. Before that, a blizzard with a name that old men still used in stories. He signed his name, the time, and one driver tractor trailer warming. He printed clear. It felt right to have belonged to the page. A radio sat on a shelf, battery-powered, and right in that way simple things are when they're kept charged. Someone had taped a note to it. Weather leave on low. He turned the volume a notch, and the voice of a NOAA announcer slid into the room, as if he had been waiting patiently behind the glass. Blizzard warning remains in effect until 10 a.m. North winds 30 to 40, gusting higher. Visibility near zero in open areas. Travel is not advised. If you must travel, use caution near snow fences and drifts. County storm shelters are operating on blue lamp status. In the larger room beyond what had been a classroom, maybe cots leaned folded along a wall. A table held a stack of knitted blankets with a paper sign. Please return. The chalkboard still wore the faint mathematics of a lesson erased years ago. 7x8 equals 50. 6 softened to a ghost. A radiator clanged lightly, as if reminding itself it knew its job. A clock over the door ticked a steady, unflustered tick. He rubbed his hands and watched his breath stop announcing itself. He didn't need to sleep. He needed to be warm in a place where the wind couldn't build him into a sculpture. He poured hot water from a kettle someone had thoughtfully labeled potable into a paper cup and watched steam write its small script. He stood by the window and saw only blue and white, and the idea of horizon beyond the lamp's reach. The building made small noises the way old buildings do, settling, remembering heat cycles, letting wood speak. At one point, in the hallway, he heard the soft, round sound of a plow somewhere beyond the reach of eyes, a distant engine working in its own slow rhythm. He didn't see it. He didn't expect to. The county's routes didn't include this road until morning. Still, the sound was nice. It meant other people were awake for the same reasons he was. He checked his rig once, twice, around the block of the schoolhouse. The wind had drawn scallop drifts on the lee side of the trailer, piled neat, as if done by a careful hand. The lamp's blue reached just enough to make the shadow lines honest. No cables had chafed. Nothing rattled in a way that meant complaint. He went back inside and put a knitted blanket around his shoulders for 3 minutes just because someone had offered it. He put it back with the fold they had intended. An hour passed the way the best hours do in a storm. Useful, quiet, measured by things that work. He wrote a note in the log before leaving, "Thank you." Warmed, heading east when visible. And the pencil left a decent line. He set the room as he'd found it, which is to say with care, and stepped back into the vestibule. The lamp pulsed, blue as a good promise. Outside, the wind had eased its tone. Snow still ran, but not with the same ambition. He brushed the steers with a gloved hand and climbed in. The cab felt like a small home. He clicked the belts across, checked mirrors that showed him only the safest parts of the world, and eased the big machine back onto the county road. The delineators greeted him again. The gate at the interchange still hung open like a held door. He merged, and the highway took him back the way a current takes a boat that is weighted sensibly in an eddy. 3 miles on, a string of plows slid into the westbound lanes like a slow-moving wall made of light and competence. Their amber bars turned the blowing snow into visible decisions. The lead driver, someone's aunt, someone's neighbor, lifted a hand off the wheel as they passed. A little salute shared between people busy at the same hour and the same job. He lifted his fingers in return. The snow behind them rilled in neat, muscular waves toward the shoulder. The night smelled like iron and cold and effort. At the next town, a low bowl of houses tucked into a modest grove, and lights yellow at the windows, and the grain elevator wearing a white crown of drift, he rolled into a truck stop, whose lights had the good manners not to be too bright. Inside, a few men and women in county jackets held coffee with both hands and watched the weather pretend to taper off. He asked the cashier, a woman with 2 pens in her hair in different colors, whether the schoolhouse shelter was new or old. "Bluestem?" she said, pleased he'd know it at all. "Old. Mothballed, mostly. County keeps it stocked best they can with donation money. Used to be part of the Blue Lamp program when they'd light up a church basement or a grange if the gates shut and folks were caught between. My grandma has a story about the blizzard of '88 and a teacher who unlocked Bluestem with a yardstick and a butter knife. They made stew out of everything in the closet and kept the stove going with math worksheets." She laughed once. County took down most of the signs when the state put in snow gates. Some of those lamps still work when the power blinks. Blue lamp status, the weather radio likes to say, makes it sound official, like the night has a desk somewhere. He told her he'd stopped, warmed, left the place better than he'd found it. She nodded in a way that made the room feel like it had just passed a peer inspection. "Thank you," she said. "Some people take blankets and don't bring them back. We pretend we don't notice, because if you need a blanket, you need a blanket." He bought a pair of knit gloves because they were hanging by the register, and seemed like a good way to pay a little extra for a good thing. Back on the road, the storm did what storms do, which is not end so much as change. The snow that had wanted to run lay down. The wind, bored with itself, went to find a different county to be loud in. The rumble strip became a detail instead of a lifeline. He passed another blue lamp sign hours later near a church up on a hill, this one dark. The lamp a cold shape against colder stone, and felt the tiny relief of a thing not needed but ready. Days afterward, he pulled the log note copy from his wallet, a habit he'd acquired without meaning to, snapping a photo of such pages when they were interesting, and looked at the names above his in the Bluestem book. The last entry read March, a decade ago, 3 travelers, one with a dog named Pumpkin. Storm door sticks, jiggle. Someone had drawn a little star next to the comment, and written, "Sorry about tracks." The pen had bled slightly on the paper. It looked ordinary in the best way. He ran that stretch different nights that winter. Sometimes the gates were down and the detour signaled him into a town where the diner stayed late. Sometimes the sky stayed so clear the stars seemed lower, and the only white lay safely on the fields pretending to be quiet oceans. A couple of times, when the wind ran the fences like a harp and the snow did its ground tricks, he checked the county radio. Blue lamp status would tick across as a footnote to blizzard warnings, or not at all. Once, creeping past the schoolhouse in a lesser storm, he saw the lamp blink blue, 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 against a sky that had forgotten color. He lifted 2 fingers from the wheel, grateful for a building, and what that building meant, that somebody, somewhere, had left a light in the dark in case someone arrived cold. It wasn't strange in the way that made a person ask questions out loud. It was strange in the way good systems feel when they outlast their budget and become a habit the land itself remembers. A square room, a radiator that knew its cadence, a pencil tied to a string, a lamp so blue it made snow look like proof. Later, in spring, he passed Bluestem in daylight. The paint looked more tired than it had at night. The lamp was off, just metal again. He turned into the gravel for a minute and walked up the steps. The door was locked. A sticker at eye level read, "This site is maintained by volunteers. Call if you use supplies. Thank you." Below it, a small plastic box held cards that said the same. He took one, not because he needed to call, but because carrying small, honest words felt like carrying a bit of the place with him. On summer nights after, when heat made the asphalt smell like tar, and the wind moved in warm sighs across the grass, he sometimes remembered the blue and the way it cast its careful color on snow. If the winter voice came over the weather radio in his mind, blue lamp status he let it, and kept his lane, and kept his time. And when winter returned, as it does for all roads that cross flat places, he knew where the schoolhouse Saturday. He knew how to find it if the ground began to pretend it was sky. He knew the lamp would say yes, yes, yes until morning. And now, the miles grow quiet. The engines fade, the rest stops empty, and the highways return to their long, endless silence. The stories slip back into the dark, but their echoes linger patient and steady, like shadows that ride just out of sight. Let the night carry you the rest of the way. Close your eyes, breathe slow, and drift gently into sleep. Good night.